How would you describe the Earthshot Prize?
The Earthshot Prize, David, is the most prestigious global environmental prize there's ever been. And the plan is to really galvanise and bring together the best minds, the best possible solutions to fixing and tackling some of the world's greatest environmental challenges.
And each year there will be how many?
So we've got 5 Earthshots for every year for the next 10 years. They are reviving the oceans, restoring and protecting nature, fixing the climates, clean air, and a waste-free world.
Hello and welcome to Track Changes. And hello, Franziska Karen.
Hello, Murray Griffin. Good to see you.
Yes, and in very exciting circumstances, which we'll explain shortly, we started with some environmental royalty, David Attenborough, and actual royalty, Prince William, talking about the Earthshot prizes. And now you and I have travelled all the way to Rio de Janeiro on the lavish Track Changes travel budget to be here for the 2025 Earthshot prizes.
That's right, Murray. And you can hear the buzz of the crowd. And we're here because we're particularly keen to find out who, or possibly what, will win in the oceans category.
Yes. And tell us a bit about the finalist that we're backing.
Well, we're particularly keen to see in the oceans category the High Seas Treaty. And the prize would be awarded to the High Seas Alliance on behalf of the treaty. And that treaty is the epic agreement that will see the protection of the world's oceans beyond national jurisdiction. We're keen to see Rebecca Hubbard of the High Seas Alliance accept this award on behalf of the High Seas Treaty.
We are indeed. The winner is going to be announced in seconds. And we're very hopeful that this extraordinary treaty, which basically protects the unclaimed planet, the 50% of the Earth that isn't claimed by any nation, that would be protected by this new treaty.
They're announcing it, Murray. Shh, okay.
O Earthshot, na categoria Revitalizar Nossos Oceanos, vai para Right Sea Trio.
Yes!
Oh, how fantastic.
Thank you so much. By 2030, with the support of the Earthshot community, the High Seas Treaty will help to ensure a healthy ocean and a stable climate that supports all life on the planet. Together, we'll be able to protect biodiversity in the high seas, which cover half the planet. Through a network of marine protected areas, better management of industrial activities, and greater ocean equity. This moment really matters because for the first time in history, the treaty gives us the power to protect the high seas' unique, diverse, and tragically threatened marine life. In these really challenging political times, the treaty stands as a powerful symbol of hope that when governments and people come together, we can protect what connects us all. But now the challenge is to turn that promise into action. So we'd like to call on all communities, Indigenous peoples, scientists, governments, industry leaders everywhere to encourage all countries to swiftly ratify the treaty and to transform it from a signed piece of paper into a living, enforceable, breathing commitment to protect the high seas for generations to come. The ocean is our planet's blue heart, and only together can we keep it thriving and beating strong. Thank you.
Well, that was a wonderful result, Franziska, wasn't it?
Incredible feat.
And very well deserved. Now,
Absolutely.
we've made our way back to Australia, and we've spoken with Rebecca about the treaty to find out more about it. What were some of the main things that struck you in the chat that we're about to play?
Well, Murray, I think what struck me is just how incredible Rebecca and I imagine the High Seas Alliance team are at working with really diverse people and being able to communicate to a diverse audience. And clearly that's something that the world needs more of to combat, biodiversity and climate crises. So I was really inspired by that. What about you?
For me, I think, look, it's just great to see that word alliance, because things get done when people form alliances. I think that's so important to remember. Big things only get done when people form alliances, and they can be all sorts of alliances. And clearly this one has been particularly effective, and I guess the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, just the scale of this treaty applying to half the planet, it is absolutely extraordinary.
Incredible. Massive.
Yes.
That's right.
All right. Well, let's go to our chat
Let's dive in.
Rebecca. I like what you did there.
Sorry, dive in.
Hello, Rebecca, and welcome to Track Changes.
Hi, Murray. Thanks for having me.
First up, could you tell us a bit about your career so far and what's been a career highlight for you?
Sure. Well, so currently I'm the director of the High Seas Alliance, but I guess I've been doing campaigning or conservation work pretty much my whole life. I started out in this path by doing an environmental science degree when I finished high school. And to be honest, I didn't really know what that was about until I got there. And I was lucky enough that it was at the very exciting time, being in the mid-90s, when there was really a lot of activism, and really, I guess, the environmental debate was really strong publicly. And I just got super inspired by all of the public campaigns that were being run around Australia, because I'm from Australia, and even internationally. And I finished my degree and I went to work for the government, which lasted for about 6 weeks.
Right.
And I decided that the pace of and the passion with which they were applying the resources to the challenges that we were faced was so incredibly slow that I just couldn't bear it. And so I pretty much made a commitment to never work for government again. And this is very much just in line with my approach to the world. And so pretty much straight from there, I just started. I volunteered, I went to blockades, I worked with the local NGOs, and I was really lucky to get my first full-time job working with Greenpeace, Australia Pacific.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Soon out of uni. And it pretty much just didn't really look back since then. So I started working on different environmental campaigns. I worked on genetic engineering, nuclear campaign, and forest conservation. But when I got kind of introduced, I was always a big lover of the ocean because I grew up next to the sea and my dad was a surfer. But when I kind of got exposed to the scale of the threats to the ocean for the first time in my job, I just pretty much just became an ocean advocate and just decided from that moment I was only going to dedicate my efforts to ocean conservation. And so, I worked for Greenpeace, then I worked for a national organisation for a few years. Then I moved to Tasmania, the little island in the south of Australia, the cold bit.
Yes.
And I established a local NGO here looking at marine protection. And then I fell into a role running a national coalition of fishing groups and conservation groups to stop the introduction of super trawlers into Australia, into our small pelagic fishery. And that really kind of, I guess that was one of the first times that I really got into working with different kinds of organizations and saw the power and the impact of really collaborating across different groups, both of stakeholders and organizations. And that was really successful. And from there, I went to Europe for a stint working on the Common Fisheries Policy, which was a fascinating and very big learning curve. I didn't know anything about the EU or fisheries policy. And so I learnt I learned about that very quickly. And I ran an organization called Our Fish. And we really worked on sustainable fisheries, but really looked at reframing it from kind of like managing fish stocks as kind of, just what people almost look at fish stocks as, I don't know, trading cards really. And we always kind of saw that as a problem because it just really diminished their value. And so we really worked on reframing the importance of fish and fish populations to ecosystems, ecosystem functioning, and the ocean's capacity to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And that was a super interesting and fascinating campaign to work on. And we worked with scientists across Europe on that and across the world, actually. So yeah, that was really interesting. I did that for 6 years, and then that was a short-term project, and then I moved to the High Seas Alliance. So it's fairly been consistently with NGOs and on conservation and campaigns, but certainly I've traversed a few issues and learnt an extreme amount along the way from many incredible people.
Yeah, that is a fascinating career backstory, and those skills, I guess, particularly that skill of learning to bring together a diverse range of stakeholders and interest groups must have stood you in really good stead when it came time to work on this campaign for the High Seas Treaty, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think you have to think about things from, like all things, where are people coming from? Like if you can have the same objective, but what drives people? And if you can understand what drives people, whether they be political leaders or industries or groups, then you can, I think, have the ability to really find common ground and then be able to really, focus in on that and make great gains.
Yeah. Now, turning to the Earthshot prizes, because you've just returned from Rio, you're now back in Tasmania, where the High Seas Treaty won in the Revive Our Oceans category. Congratulations on that win. That's a huge achievement. You had Prince William there, Kylie was there, a whole lot of sort of global dignitaries and glitterati, as well as the sort of environmental heroes that were being honoured on the night. Was it a Padam moment for you? And I guess on a more serious note, what does the Earthshot Prize mean for the High Seas Alliance and for the treaty going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it was a surreal moment, I have to say. It very much felt like we were part of the environmental celebrity world. It was very exciting. I think as an environmentalist, you don't often get into those scenarios. So it was exciting and it was very fun, but definitely on a serious note, I think, it was a real honor to receive that prize on behalf of the treaty. And certainly we did so acknowledging the enormous amount of work and leadership from governments, experts, NGOs, and, people across the world over many years, over 2 decades. So I think that's really the most important thing to say, and what it does for the treaty, it's a fantastic opportunity. I think it really recognizes the global importance of the treaty, and I think it really will give us the opportunity to really amplify the importance of the treaty to a much broader audience and really help us to get attention and support from parts of the community that maybe don't know about the treaty and how significant it is for the future of ocean conservation.
Could you tell us a bit about the history of the High Seas Treaty and the High Seas Alliance and the years of effort that have led to this point? And how is this treaty different from some of the other international marine treaties that we already have in place?
So going back over 2 decades, we have the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is, the very overarching law of the sea, which covers international waters. But it was entered into force, I think, in 1982. So it's, over 40 years old. And so in the early 2000s, it was recognized by a number of, I think, conservation organizations primarily, but also scientists and other experts, that it really was kind of out of date in the sense that it's really around managing some impacts, but didn't really prioritize protecting biodiversity in its objectives, and didn't really have the power to protect biodiversity. And it was around the time that organizations and were really trying to protect deep sea environments. And so they really realized that there was this big gap in that international law and the other implementing agreements that come below that. So there's a fish stocks agreement that looks at managing fish stocks, and there's the International Maritime Organization that looks at managing shipping, and the International Seabed Authority that looks at managing impacts on the seabed. But there was really nothing that took that holistic perspective and really centered on, we must protect the biodiversity, which is the foundations, right, that support these other basically resources that we exploit. And so it started in the early 2000s, and there were many conversations, and it went through that UN system. There was talking to some of the people who'd been in, I wasn't involved in these early years of the campaign, but I talked to some of those people in Rio, actually. And, they really talked about, in the first few years, it was a real struggle to get people to even appreciate the need for a high seas treaty. So it took a few years of conversations, of preparatory meetings through the slow UN system to get acknowledgement and support from countries that we needed something else. And then eventually they got to that point of that recognition, and then there was a series of intergovernmental conferences that then began and ended up going over about 5 years, and which is where basically the draft agreement for the High Seas Treaty, otherwise known as the BBNJ agreement, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, where it was negotiated. So there was a draft agreement that then went to a series of different intensive meetings, and countries negotiated the details of that agreement with very strong support from civil society. The High Seas Alliance was created in 2011. So before that agreement and those IGC meetings started, and it really started because a number of those different conservation organizations that had recognized the need for it and were working on it realized that if we worked together as an alliance, we could have a greater impact. And so the alliance started in 2011 with a fairly small number of groups, I think, maybe around a dozen. And then it grew over time with the negotiations until it was finally, the details were finally agreed in what's known as IGC 5.2 biz,
right.
which was essentially...
You've got to love UN language. It's just...
I mean, it's horrific, isn't it? Honestly, It was essentially the sixth meeting of those governments and the negotiations, and it was actually my first week on the job of the High Seas Alliance. So pretty much the most successful first week on a job ever. And it took the full 2 weeks, and then the president of those negotiations, Rena Lee, who people may have seen, she's really an incredibly impressive and inspiring human. She pretty much locked the negotiators into the UN building for 36 hours until they finalized those negotiations. And I think it was hugely successful in that it was agreed unanimously. And one of the key things to really note about that is that from the beginning of those negotiations, countries agreed, like there's 4 pillars to the treaty, which we can discuss in more detail, but 2 of them are around, real environmental protection, around marine protected areas and environmental impact assessments, and 2 are more around ocean equity, so capacity building and transfer of technology, and the fair and equitable access to benefits from marine genetic resources. And there was an agreement at the beginning between countries that they must negotiate all 4 of those pillars in lockstep together, because
really?
they didn't want to sacrifice one for the other. And that, I think, was really key to the success of those negotiations and getting to that unanimous agreement in March of 2023.
Can I ask you, but why do you think that was so crucial to the success? Like, what did that mean?
Well, it's because essentially, as we are all aware, some countries have more capacity, more access to resources, more funds, and particularly with the high seas, this is a really significant thing because getting to the high seas is very expensive. So accessing the resources out there is really quite inequitable if you don't actively try to address that. And so for developing countries, the equity issues and the capacity building issues were very, very important, because without them, they couldn't probably engage in the conservation elements, equally or equitably. Not that they necessarily believed in those conservation objectives less, but they wouldn't be able to engage in those as much. Whereas the developed countries, they come with they're already out of the starting gate. They're further ahead. They have more access, and so it was important to really kind of make sure it was more of a level playing field, I guess. And so it was important for both developing and developed countries to be making sure that they were in the same kind of on the same playing field and able to negotiate in that way.
Can I ask you, I mean, you mentioned your first week on the job and that there was a significant advance, I guess, in that first week. What would you say now to yourself, starting out with the High Seas Alliance? What would you say to that Rebecca to help her, I guess, steer a course towards a successful outcome?
No, that's a really good question. Breathe. Just remember to breathe. And also, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So, yeah, it's, because everything feels urgent, and it is urgent. We are facing an ecological crisis. We need this treaty. We need it implemented. We need the protection that it will deliver. But it's a big job, and there's also a lot of people who are very invested. So yeah, treat it as a marathon and work with the incredible diversity of people and skills that are available. And I feel like, we have done that, and that's why we have been successful to date. But breathing is always a good hot tip.
Absolutely. So were there some sort of particularly significant moments, either moments when things advanced in a very significant way, they suddenly advanced, or where significant threats emerged that had to be dealt with as quickly as possible?
I think that since the agreement, we set, the treaty was agreed in the March of 23, and then it was adopted in June of 2023. And we set that deadline, or that aim of reaching the 60 ratifications necessary for entry into force of the law by the UN Ocean Conference in June 25. And I think that just the decision to do that was a significant and incredibly important moment, because it really, really, it was very effective in harnessing focus and energy of both civil society, but particularly of governments and leaders in terms of achieving that goal. And so I think just identifying that moment, and then the actual moment of the UN Ocean Conference in June of this year, were really, really significant. Now, of course, we got to the UN Ocean Conference and we got to 50, I think it was 50 or 51 ratifications, which was on the one hand a little bit disappointing, but on the other hand, still incredibly motivating, in the sense that to get 51 ratifications in, less than 2 years was remarkable. And of course, it gave us even extra impetus to get it done quickly. And we were lucky that the UN General Assembly came just 3 months later and offered that next milestone for countries to aim towards for delivery. So in the end, we did get the 60 ratifications within 2 years of the treaty being opened for signature, which was really remarkable by international standards for a UN treaty.
Absolutely remarkable. I imagine there must be a lot of plastics treaty negotiators who look very jealously your way, Rebecca.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes. So could you tell us about the difference that the treaty will make in terms of ocean protection? What can happen now that couldn't or wouldn't have happened before?
So one of the most important things is that we can now create marine protected areas in the high seas. So we haven't had the ability to do that before. So we now have a legal framework for creating protected areas that will limit destructive activities. And we have, as part of that, the requirement to cooperate and coordinate and promote the objectives of biodiversity conservation in the other international forums like the International Maritime Organization, all the regional fisheries management organizations. So it really is a huge boost and accelerator and a kind of, I always think of it about giving us the potential to spiral upwards in terms of ambition. So that, I think, is one of the most significant outcomes as well in terms of environmental impact assessments. There is now a much more modern standard for environmental impact assessments of activities in the high seas in terms of their assessment, both from a transparency perspective, because one of the great features of the High Seas Treaty is that it has a high level of transparency and inclusivity baked into it. So for new activities that are proposed in the high seas or in national waters that could impact the high seas or have transboundary impacts, those proposed activities need to be submitted to a public, what's called a clearinghouse mechanism, which doesn't mean much to anyone, but it's kind of like a public database that then everybody can access and will have information about what the proposed activity is. There are higher standards for assessing the impacts of those. So it includes a requirement to assess cumulative impacts, including climate change. And that's quite significantly more, it's a higher standard than what exists in a number of these other international forums. And that, I think, is really significant, particularly as we face, other threats, potentially like marine geoengineering or new forms of fishing like mesopelagic fishing, or even looking at the full ecosystem impacts of things like bottom trawling and potentially even deep sea mining. So that, I think, is really significant. And then I think from the ocean equity perspective, it does really aim to address equity and access to both marine technology and resources, the benefits from marine genetic resources in the high seas. And if, well monitored and really maximized, that could be a real game changer for many research institutes, students, scientists in developing countries. That will really give them access to data and resources so that they can more equitably partake in both the responsibility to conserve the high seas, but also in exploring what is in the high seas.
Coming up, Rebecca talks about the importance of good communication and gives her advice to other NGOs on how to make progress. And she also talks about some unique marine areas, including the volcanic Lost World, the Pacific Donut Holes, and the Sargasso Sea. Stay tuned. I just have one last question, and then I know Franziska has some questions that she'd like to ask you. But my last question is: you've just talked about, what the difference that the treaty will make. How does the work of the High Seas Alliance, how does that change now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, essentially, our objective has always been to protect biodiversity in the high seas. So we'll continue to work towards that objective. And I guess how we do it now slightly shifts as we move from negotiations and supporting countries to ratify into supporting countries to implement. So what a lot of the kind of work that we do is sharing expertise and providing technical guidance on how to do those things, like how to develop a high seas marine protected area proposal. How do you engage, Indigenous peoples and incorporate traditional knowledge into those kinds of proposals and into the implementation of the treaty. So we'll continue to support countries by providing that technical expertise. We also will continue to act as we're kind of like a connector. We have amazing networks of experts, both within civil society and NGOs, but externally as well, connected through, scientific institutes or think tanks or governments, and really helping to cross-fertilize and share some of those best practices or identify opportunities for collaboration. We have coordinators in all of the regions around the world, and then experts. And then, of course, we have 17 member organizations, including the IUCN, who are scattered around the world. So we really use that network to be able to support countries, but also connect countries, because it is the high seas and no one country can do this on their own. And I guess the other thing really is to really promote the importance and the value of the treaty. So we'll continue to do work in the public realm of trying to communicate the importance of it and encouraging action and supporting civil society and communities to be engaged in that as well.
All right. Thanks very much, Rebecca. Over to you, Franziska.
Thanks so far, Rebecca. It's so exciting to hear, especially after the milestone of both hitting the 60 state ratifications back in September, but also the recognition that you got just recently at the Earthshot Awards. So that target was hit of the 60 ratifications in September, and you said that happened so quickly within 2 years, which is an incredible feat. But my question is around what happens when it enters into force on the 17th of January 2026. What's been planned for that day and immediately after? What can we expect and look out for?
It's a very good question. There are some parts of the treaty that and kind of immediately become active. So, for example, so first of all, there will be a big celebration. I know that the former president, Rena Lee, is very enthusiastic, as are many others, to celebrate the entry into force. So I think we'll be organising global celebrations. But essentially, shortly after that, there is a number of the articles will essentially become active, or the requirements of the treaty will become active. So, for example, I mentioned before the environmental impact assessment requirement. So countries who are parties to the treaty will, if there are activities proposed, they should start to log those activities and assess them for whether or not they need to have an environmental impact assessment, and then follow the process that's stepped out in the treaty. And one of the is similarly with the marine genetic resources pillar of the treaty. So that's around the sharing of data. There's requirements in the treaty around, okay, it's easier to explain an example. If there's an expedition out to the high seas and they're collecting data on marine genetic resources, there is a requirement for that research to then be logged. So where are they going? What are they collecting? That kind of information. Now, those informations are meant to be submitted to the clearinghouse mechanism, which I mentioned before. And one of the really important things that I haven't mentioned is that there are a number of things within the treaty that need to be set up for it to be operational. And that includes the clearinghouse mechanism. It includes the scientific and technical body who assesses activities or marine protected area proposals, for example. So there's a finance committee and a number of other committees, but there are a couple that are quite essential, and the clearinghouse mechanism is one of those. So what we've had until over the last about 7 months is a preparatory commission process. And that is a process that's been 2 meetings, one in April, one in August, and there's a third set for March. And that has been negotiations amongst countries to decide all of the rules, all of the modalities for operating, and who sits in those committees, how do they vote, how do they operate, basically. And one of the challenges of the success of the treaty entering into force so quickly is that some of those things are not yet established. So we are in this important moment where some of those things need to be established as quickly as possible so that treaties can start to deliver and implement on their obligations.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think I checked your website this morning, and 75 countries have now ratified and 145 have signed, marking their commitment to ratifying. Can you tell us a bit about the importance of universal ratification, or getting more to commit, and how are we going in that respect?
It's really crucial for the treaty to be as effective as possible for us to have global ratification. So our goal in UN terms is universal ratification, which is, all UN member states to ratify the treaty. There's about 193 states, and 145, as you say, have signed, which is really brilliant in that they're on their way and they're working towards that if they haven't already. We're really confident. It's important because in terms of why it's important, obviously the high seas are global. They cover the planet. And for the treaty to be most effective, we want countries from all regions engaged in its management and protection and benefiting from its sustainable management and the resources that come from it. So from an equity perspective, it's very important that we get countries from all regions as party to the treaty. In terms of its effectiveness, it's really essential because obviously if a country doesn't ratify the treaty, then they're not bound by its rules. And so we want all countries to be bound by its rules, because it will be easier or more effective to enforce. And obviously it also gives a lot more kind of, global importance to the treaty if you have more countries signed on. And I think one of the things to note, we're really confident that we will get a lot more countries ratified by the first conference of the parties, because as I said before, that's where a number of really key decisions on how the treaty operates will be made. So countries will want to be at that decision-making table. They will want to be there having their opinions heard on who is in those key committees and how are those decisions made or voted on, or, consultation processes, etc. So I think we'll see a lot more countries ratify by then. And I guess the only other thing to note is that for some countries, they have quite long legislative processes for ratifying a treaty. And so the fact that a country hasn't ratified doesn't necessarily mean that it's not very keen to. It may just be, in a fairly arduous legislative process nationally.
And aside from ones that might be in that arduous process, are there any significant parties that we're waiting to hear from, or have said that there maybe won't? And are there any concerns about their non-participation and impacting on the treaty more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, what's really important is that we have, like, I guess, not just that global representation, but we have both developing and developed countries. Like, so how a treaty works is that the developed countries contribute funds to its operation. So it's important that we have developed countries ratified and party and contributing to its running. So we really want to make sure that we have more developed countries as well. We want to make sure that we have key maritime nations. As I said before, we want them to be bound by those rules. So there are a couple of countries who have signed but not ratified yet, but we're eagerly awaiting or have indicated that they might sign, but we haven't yet heard. So, China was one of the first countries to sign, and they're obviously a really important maritime nation, but they have approved ratification through their parliament. So we're hoping that will happen imminently. Japan's another important maritime nation, a fishing nation that we would really like to see as a party. And again, indications are that they intend to ratify. So we're hoping that is also imminent. Yeah, and I mean, of course, there are countries from all the different regions. They're just the couple that pop up front of mind. Obviously, the US is also one that everybody asks about. US signed the treaty very early on. So technically, they are, or under UN kind of process, they're obliged to act consistently with the objectives of the treaty. And we really hope that they will look to ratify and participate cooperatively going forward. And, I think one of the things to note is that treaties, ultimately they will last decades and they long surpass political timelines. So that's a positive as well for all nations around the world, to be honest.
A good thing to remember. Yep.
It's the long game.
It's the long game. Yeah, the tides come and go, but we're on the right track. I do imagine that counter. Do you get a sort of a notification when another country signs or ratifies? Is there a sort of, does your organization celebrate when you've got another one down, or
absolutely
counter increases?
We celebrate every single ratification, and we have I'm sure you've seen, we have a ratification tracker online, and I mean, we don't get a notification, but often we're told by countries, or contacts that someone's ratified, if not directly from the country, and it's on the UN site. We always double check it with the UN treaty list and that it's official before we update our tracker. But we know from actually looking at our website tracking that a lot of people do, and also from comments from governments, that a lot of people look at our tracker as the one to be the reporter on who's ratified. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful map. I enjoy the colours and being able to zoom in on it. But I think earlier you mentioned the importance of having developed countries, sign and on board for funding and other reasons. But I also think, obviously, there's a lot of relevance and interest from small island developing states. Could you talk a bit about the treaty and its relevance to small island developing states and why it's important to them, or
of course,
what special sort of considerations apply?
Yeah, 100%. And to be fair, the reason I emphasize developed countries is because we'd like more developed countries to ratify at this point. Yes. And the small island developing states have been amazing at ratifying. I can't remember off the top of my head the number, but there's a very high number of the parties to the treaty that are small island developing states already. So that's really brilliant. Obviously, for SIDS, there are a few reasons why it's really relevant. Obviously, the alternative name for small island developing states is big ocean states, or BOSS, as the president of Palau likes to call them. And that is, their economies often depend quite heavily on the health of their ocean jurisdiction. And obviously what happens adjacent to their waters impacts the health of their waters. So the High Seas Treaty is really significant in that it has the potential to reinforce and increase whatever benefits their national management and protection agendas have secured, right? So if you have protected areas in a small island developing state's waters, but then you have, incredibly destructive activities on the edge of those of that boundary, there is no boundary really in the ocean. Fish flow across those boundaries, and impacts flow as well. So being able to reinforce positively conservation outside of those national waters of small island developing states is really significant and important, because many of them really have done a lot of work on national protection and management as well. They are often, SIDS are really, often developing states and have, incredibly small populations and few resources to be able to deliver on, some of these big ambitions that we have for management conservation. And so the treaty offers an opportunity for access to more resources, both through capacity building and transfer of marine technology, as well as data and potentially financial benefits from those marine genetic resources that I mentioned before. So it's a real opportunity for them to be able to, bolster their capacity and engage more in that conservation in the high seas as well, which is a really great track for their young professionals and as well.
Oh yeah, so important. Earlier you mentioned the impact assessment requirements. Are there any other treaty provisions in your view that are particularly noteworthy or that you haven't mentioned that you'd like to unpack a bit?
I mentioned before that there's a financial mechanism associated with the treaty, and as part of that there's 3 funds. So there's a voluntary trust fund, a global environmental facility fund, and a special trust fund. And these are all designed to help. There's a number of details that still need to be agreed through this PrepCom process that I discussed before, but they're essentially designed to help implement the treaty, to fund countries to implement the treaty. And the Special Trust Fund is a particularly interesting and innovative fund which allows for contributions by both public and private entities. So governments can put into it, but companies can also put into it, or philanthropists. And I think one of the really interesting potential opportunities of the Special Trust Fund is having industries that use the resources or depend on the high seas to contribute to that Special Trust Fund as a kind of percentage of their profits, or as a kind of potential resource rent. So I think that is a really exciting opportunity. Maybe the only other thing to mention as another theme that I think that's throughout the treaty is the engagement and involvement of Indigenous people in local communities. Compared to some other treaties, it was a real priority, particularly also for, I think, the Pacific small island developing states, but it's obviously in the treaty as a result for all, and that is the importance of meaningful engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities in its implementation. And I think that is really an exciting opportunity, and again will really require some thinking through of how it's best done. So considering things like how can traditional knowledge be respectfully and obviously with permission be incorporated into things like marine protected area proposals to, to form the basis of the values that you're protecting for a high seas marine protected area. How do we represent those or present those in a way where, and cultural values be considered, equitable to ecological or scientific values? And if so, how does that happen? And how do you engage those Indigenous leaders in that process in the most respectful and equitable way, and in a way that they want to be engaged? And I think that's going to be a really exciting thing for the treaty to develop further.
Absolutely. You just mentioned marine protected areas again. And I think the High Seas Alliance has also already identified some potential areas that could form the first NPAs. Did you want to talk a little bit about one or some of those?
So I guess there's quite a bit of knowledge already out there about some of the really special places in the high seas. And so the High Seas Alliance, and especially our members, have put some time into identifying those areas. So we have a list on the High Seas Alliance website of around 10 of the sites that represent different kinds of ecosystems that would could rightly make up the first wave of high seas NPAs. So for those in Australia, there's the Lord Howe and South Tasman Sea sites. They are between Australia and New Zealand, and they're actually two different sites, but in one kind of relatively small high seas region, you could say, by global standards. But it's really, they're based on a chain of seamounts, and there's some really spectacular values there. It's we call it the volcanic lost world. And there's an amazing variety of both localized species, to those different seamounts, but then also as a chain, they're really critical to a number of migratory species, both seabirds and like fish, but also larger cetaceans and sharks. So that's one area that's close to Australia. There's the Salas y Gomez and Nazca Ridges, which are in the South Pacific, close to South America, and they're currently being looked at Chile is currently looking at championing them as one of the first high seas marine protected areas. There is many sites actually, but where else? There's some in the Pacific, in what they are commonly called the Pacific donut holes. So, I talked about those big ocean territories of the small island states, and then there's these little pockets of high seas scattered throughout the Pacific Islands, and there are some there that have been identified as high value and worthy of protection as well. They're really all over the world, and there's the Sargasso Sea, which is really kind of an interesting example. That's seagrass, a seagrass environment. So it's in the high seas, and usually, we would see seagrass in coastal waters, but there it's out in the high seas, and it creates this incredibly different ecosystem and unique ecosystem that's really needs protection as well. So there's a whole range of them, and a number of countries are looking at those different sites, some of those sites, and looking at starting to pull together some of the science and starting to, engage stakeholders. I didn't mention the thermal dome. The thermal dome is also off Central America, and that's a really fascinating area. It's kind of a moving location, and it's linked to the movement of currents, and how at certain times the currents bring in, really productive big biomasses of certain species, and it kind of can move around slightly and swell and contract a little bit. So that's a site that Costa Rica is really interested in and has started to investigate. So there's a huge range of really interesting and incredibly diverse ecosystems out there. So that's a really exciting new phase that we're moving towards as well.
So exciting, so diverse, and I'm sure many more will be identified and brought forward when it is possible to have these marine protected areas formed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they will take a couple of years to develop as well. And obviously, we're all really trying to contribute to the goal of protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030.
Mm-hmm.
So there's quite a lot of work to be done. And so definitely starting already is a good idea.
And gathering that science, like you said. I've got one more detailed question before stepping back a bit, and this one is just around the legal implications of the agreement, of the treaty as it comes into force. Can you expand a little bit on that? And for example, what happens if a country breaches its treaty obligations?
Yeah, so there is an implementation and compliance committee is one of the committees that I was mentioning before that needs to be established as part of the setup of the treaty, and it will be responsible for monitoring the compliance of the parties. The treaty doesn't have a kind of, I guess there isn't a punishment for non-compliance, but there is kind of written into the treaty steps to support and assist countries to comply. So the goal really is to using positive support and peer encouragement to get countries to comply in terms of, and that's, broadly across all of those pillars that we've discussed in terms of, environmental impact assessments or marine genetic resource research, reporting. When it comes to enforcement of marine protected areas that are established, that will be something that will need to be detailed in the marine protected area management plan that is developed by the countries and agreed. And that's something that hasn't yet been done. We don't have any high seas marine protected areas yet. This will be the first time that we develop them. And so that will be a very important part of that development process, is identifying the monitoring and control and enforcement elements and how that will happen. And there's some really interesting ideas around that. I mean, there's a lot of satellite and technology solutions for monitoring, but there's also some interesting conversations, with other UN agencies like the Drug and Enforcement Agency about, how could their operations at sea be utilized to help with enforcement of marine protected areas. So that's a really interesting space that's, lots of discussions at the moment and will be really, I think, fascinating to advance.
And obviously there's still a lot to advance in the space of the treaty and surrounds. But I guess more broadly, is there other unfinished business on the ocean protection front in an international policy context besides obviously operationalizing this treaty? Is there other unfinished business, or are all the policy tools there and it's just about knuckling down and getting it done?
I think that we have most of the tools, and if we are just committed to delivering them, we can make a massive, massive impact. So yeah, I think with the High Seas Treaty, we've plugged some really, really significant gaps, and now we really just need to get the job done.
Yeah, fantastic. And the High Seas Alliance, you're a non-government body, obviously. What's your advice to other climate and environmental NGOs out there that want to influence and shape international negotiations?
Oh, I hate to give advice to other organizations. I know that in every different setting, there are different challenges that you face. I mean, I think there are some basics that probably most people who work on these things know, but that is, find your champions and really work with champions. I think have a diverse set of champions. Don't, from if it's international, then from all regions. I think working with people in country is really important. Having if in your organization having people from the region that live in the region understand it is really, really critical to ensure that, you know, the way that you operate is relevant and sensitive to different cultural and social contexts. And yeah, I guess it's just persistence. Just persistence.
Yep.
And hope for a little bit of star alignment at some point, because I think with some of these things, you know, you can work on something for years and years and years, and then certain stars align, and just being ready and able to respond to those opportunities is really also really, really important.
Obviously, the High Seas Alliance is a fantastic communicator as well. The website, as I've already referenced it, you know, is really beautiful and engaging, and has lots of videos and links and graphics. Do you have any advice on a communication front, or getting communication right for other non-government organizations or even government organizations?
I think with communications, I think making things look appealing is really, really important. I mean, because I think, you know, from our perspective, we want people to look at the high seas images and the communications and the messages and feel both the value and the importance and this for us, the scale of what we're trying to achieve. So what we've tried to do with our communications is really, I think, try to imbibe those communications materials, be it the website or a video or social media posts, with some of those values that we think are really, really significant and that are important for why the High Seas Treaty matters. And so I think that applies for others, like really emphasize what is the value of what you are doing and why is it relevant to people and why it matters now. And I think, you know, really trying to ensure that your communications are targeted to their audience is always really, really key. I mean, we have a lot of really in-depth technical briefings that many people wouldn't want to read because they are so incredibly detailed and technical. But, you know, they're very, very important for our target audience of government negotiators. And so, you know, that's a certain set of communications materials that's super valuable and important. But we wouldn't, you know, try and push those to, you know, our, you know, just the general youth cohort that we engage with our youth ambassador program. So it's really, I think, always tailoring your communications to your audience, and that can be in the kind of form of the communications, but it also can be in the messaging or the technical depth.
Well, thank you for that. And at our final question, so we usually end on this one. So what fact or insight do you wish was more widely known because it would help us move faster to a cleaner, greener and better world?
I actually think that maybe it's just that every person can make a difference. It's not a scientific fact. It's about the potential impact of individuals and people working together. I think, because, you know, we have so many facts. We have all the facts, and yet that doesn't change anything. And we've had so many of these facts for decades, and it doesn't change anything. I think what changes things is when people feel that they can make a difference and they act from that place. And it's really astonishing what you can achieve when you just put your mind to it and are particularly dogged. So yeah, there's a really old classic saying something about you don't know the power of an individual until you sleep in a room with a mosquito or something. And I think it's something like that. You know, it's really like you have the power to make a big difference.
What a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
It's been great talking to you. Thanks a lot for joining us.
You too. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, that was so fascinating and so interesting, and I'm so inspired, particularly by the scale. I look forward to seeing how it all evolves and emerges in the global operational space.
It was absolutely fantastic to hear Rebecca talking about, what they've done and how they've done it. And really, congratulations to everybody involved in that, the government negotiators, of course, the High Seas Alliance, and the various industries and communities that depend on the oceans. And also, I would just like to say, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, Franziska, that Octavia the octopus, who is the mascot for the High Seas Alliance, is an absolutely brilliant graphic device, and people should go and check out the Alliance's website.
100% agree, Murray.
Okay. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Bye-bye.